Welcome back. Let's finish our discussion on caching on the client side, because we already know how to do caching here. It's really dependent on your application and how you want to implement it. Now, with the browser though, there's a nice standard that we can use. And I showed you with GitHub Pages and our RoboFriends app how we're able to cache using Create React Apps, bundling techniques, and also Service Worker. But what if you actually controlled the server? Unlike GitHub Pages or RoboFriends that is purely front-end, what if you have an Express server and you need to cache contents? Well, we can take advantage of the HTTP cache that comes with all browsers. You see, we have the browser over here in blue and the server over here in blue. And if we do a GET request to a file endpoint, well, the browser initially makes the request to the server, and the server, if you remember, always responds with something. Let's say a JSON response that says success or some sort of data. But along with this response, you usually also send headers that with Express come by default, or you can manually configure them. You can have things like content length, but then you have these two things that we use for caching. One is cache control, and the other one is ETag. In using these headers that we send from the server, we can tell the browser what to cache, how to cache it, and when to not cache it. So let's explore that topic. I have over here a very simple server that I've created. Now let's go through the code. Usually I like writing this out by myself, but this was something that we've already done a ton of times with Express servers, so I didn't want to bore you with just starting from scratch. All we care about are these two endpoints that are new and we haven't seen before, the endpoint high and the endpoint static. Now, there might be some new code that we haven't seen here before, so let's go over it. The first one, static, is an endpoint that we're adding, and it's a middleware. And this is how you serve static websites in Express or static files in Express. All we're saying is serve the Express, use the Express static method to serve the file that is in the public folder. And you see over here that I've created a public folder with index.html, which is a very simple HTML file. If I go back to the server, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. There you go. All I'm saying is at this endpoint, serve this index.html file. And I've also added the option that is max age. And in Express, the way you define this cache control header is to simply say, what's the max age? And max age means how many seconds do you want the browser to remember this content, this data that we're sending it. So in our case, we're saying I want max age to be 2 hours. And I can say 2 hours or 2 days here, or I can give it a number that is in milliseconds. In our case, let's just leave it at 2 hours. So I'm saying at this endpoint, I want you to remember this resource for 2 hours. So let's test this out. It's a simple server that's running this, that's going to serve me our index.html file. Let's have a look. If I go to localhost and we go to the static endpoint, I get my website that says, cache me baby one more time. If I open up the developer tools, and I refresh, I see that the static file over here returned a 304 instead of a 200. Now, 304, if I hover over it, you see that it's not modified. And if I refresh again, it keeps saying not modified. If I do a hard refresh with emptying cache, I get 200. That means it went all the way to the server and back again and returned me this information. So what does 304 not modified mean? If I open up our static contents and I scroll to the headers, I see that, oh, here's my cache control header that I've set. So 2 hours is this many seconds. And we also see the e-tag field. And the 304 not modified is what we get when the e-tag automatically generated through Express says that nothing has modified in this file. And it says that usually with something that is a hash. It's a randomly generated number that if nothing changes in our index.html file will stay the same. So if we remember this number, I'm going to change something in our index.html file. Let's go to index.html and add some exclamation marks here. I'm going to save. And now when I go back and refresh, I get 200 once again. Because my e-tag now is completely different. Just to make sure that we did that right, I'm going to press enter again. And I get 304. Because now I've already cached this information. This e-tag is the same. Again, if I go back and change it to just the period, go back and refresh, I now get 200. And the e-tag is once again ending in 30. Changing in exclamation marks, if I refresh, the e-tag now ends in 59. All right, so that's 304, the not modified request. And what that means is the browser makes that request to my server, Express server, and says, hey, bud, I have this e-tag thing. Has the resource changed? The Express server says, nope, this is the e-tag that I have. The file hasn't changed, so you can go ahead and use whatever's in your cache. That is the HTTP cache of this website. How cool is that? Now, here's the interesting part. Because I've cached this file or this endpoint, that gives me the index.html file for 2 hours. If I now close this and open up a new window, and I just go to localhost 3000 to static, and I open up the developer tools first, and I go to static, I get 200, but it's a little bit grayed out. And if I go all the way to the right, I see that it's from disk cache because we've cached this. If I don't visit this website for 2 hours and I come back, I won't get this because I've told it, hey, I only want you to cache this for 2 hours. Very, very cool. Now, just as an extra example, and also just to introduce you some new syntax that is a little bit more advanced, what we have here of serving index.html file, I can do in similar fashion this way as well. I set headers. So I use response.headers, and I'm using Express 4.0 API here. Express has changed this depending on the version that you use. So just heads up, you'll have to go to the Express documentation. It might be set headers or some different method. But I can change the header to say cache control. I want this resource to be public and max age of, I believe this is maybe a day. And I can also say that the header is content type text HTML. And then I send the response using what we call a new buffer. And this is something that comes in Node. And a buffer allows us to send HTML strings over the wire so they can be read by the browser. And underneath the hood, this is what serving static files is like. It's using this new buffer. But if I go to the hi endpoint now, and remember this max age that I've just created, 86400, I'll go to the hi endpoint. And I see that the hi endpoint, I get the test string that I've just sent. And then I also get, look at that, cache control, max age, 86400. And I have my e-tag as well. And there you have it. If I go back here to, let's go to Product Hunt. And this Product Hunt, if I open up the Network tab, we have now an idea of what it does. If I scroll up here to, let's say, the HTML page, I can see that, all right, they're, look at that, using Cloudflare as their CDN. They're using content encoding, BR. But if I scroll down, I also see that they have cache control of max H0. That means they don't want it cached. And we now have a way to read our headers and understand what is going on. What about their api.min.js? I see that, oh yeah, they're definitely caching that. And there's also an e tag associated with it. And you can start to understand what each website does in terms of caching. But to wrap this up, when it comes to caching, you can implement it in all levels of your stack. It's not just one place. It's not just the browser. It's not just with the CDN that you can cache. You can cache anywhere that you see fit for your application. You'll most likely start with something like the front end with the cache control and e tags and using service workers, maybe using a CDN like Cloudflare. And then you might want to move into actually using Redis for caching database queries, or perhaps caching expensive API calls that take a long time. It is really up to you as a developer to implement. But as we know, when it comes to performance, you only want to start working on a problem, on maybe a cache solution, when there's a measurable test that we can implement, that we can for sure know that if we implemented this cache method, that it is going to significantly improve our application and our user experience. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.